All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's shir. I'm sorry. Just pull this up. Thank you to our sponsors, our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Avraham and Shaindy Kelman, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drashos in memory of their parents. To thank Jack Bennett for dedicating all the shiurim this month in memory of Givati Brigade First Sergeant Nikolai Rappaport, and Dr. Linda Weinberg for dedicating all the shiurim this month in memory of her husband, Dr. Paul Weinberg, parents Moshe Ben Jerome David. Our week of learning sponsors, Avron, Shaan, and Judah Elbaum, in the merit of a Refua Shleima for Ami Ben Chaya. Thank you, son. Okay, excellent. All right, so with that, let us begin. We have you hear me all right? Good. Okay. We have a beautiful daf ahead of us today. I'll tell you, such as a muster and everything. You know, I'm looking on the on the YouTube broadcast, and it says on the bottom of the screen, it says excellent connection. I thought, can you imagine if there was an app for Ruchnius like that, right? A little feedback about how you were doing with the Ribbon Shalom. How great would it be to start the day? Excellent connection. All right, maybe one day. All right, well, so with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Lamed Gimel 33. We are picking up in Yahrzeit Hashem on Lamed Beis Amud Beis. We actually left off a little bit before the two dots. We left off 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines up from the bottom. Amr li Ravina le Ravashi, Amr lon Rav Acha me Hutzal. So Ravina said to Ravashi, Rav Acha from Hutzal said to us, Deman sharkin le tanura biyama tava, that you go ahead and literally you close up your stove with clay on Yom Tiv. Now, what is this talking about? If you take a look at Rashi over here, Rashi says, Sharkin le Tanura. It's in the wide lines of Rashi, the third line down. Sharkin le Tanura. Avde Adoni Tachin Sebivos Kiswe Piatanor Bitit. So the servants of master, in other words, the servants, go ahead and literally, it's very interesting, seal up the opening of the oven with clay, with mortar. Shelo Yetze Choma Shahatzli Kishatzli Besocho. In order that the heat is contained in the oven and the heat doesn't dissipate and have an adverse effect on that which is being roasted inside. Sharuach kasha litzli. The tamal on milsa mishum de gavel tit told the delishu. So we'll say once we're talking on the topics of Hilchos Yamtiv, so the Gemara is asking, they were asking, how are you able to engage in this practice? After all, the creation of mud on Shabbos or on Yom Tiv is a problem of the malacha of losh. Losh means kneading something, creating any thick mixture. It's actually true. This is in the malacha of losh. There's balila ava, balila raka. There's a more liquidy mixture, a thicker mixture. But right now, at least for mud, isn't it the creation of a thicker mixture on Shabbos, which should be part of Yom Tiv? Which obviously this is Yom Tiv because they're cooking. Would that not be a problem of losh? So he answered, Amrale anan araksa de pras samchinon. It's not a problem. We get our mud from the banks of the river Pras. We'll say an incredible Inyane Dioma. Right? Remember again, one of the 4 rivers of Gan Eden. We just read it in yesterday's parasha. So where do I get my mud from? I get my mud from the banks of the Euphrates, from the banks of Nar Pras. Rashi says, over Araksa de Pras Samchinon, al Svasol Shal Pras Anu Nismachim, B'davar Shein Anu Tzrichen Legavel Tit, Shesvas Pras Tit Megubahu. We'll say, interestingly enough, the banks of the Pras River are mud. So I don't have to make my own mud. We take the mud from the banks of the river. So therefore, there is no problem of lush. We'll say, just so you should know, by the way, this mud on the banks of the river of Pras actually comes up a different time where the Gemara discusses about immersing in the Pras River, in Nar Pras, for mikvah. So the Gemara discusses that at certain times of the year, the women had to put down mats on the ground of the river in order to immerse in it because the mud was so intense that they would sink in, cause a problem for chatzitza in mikvah. So again, it's the same mud. So the Gemara says, "V'hani mili hu ditzari me esmo." But remember again, in order for that mud to be usable, you would have to go ahead and literally make a siman, some type of designation or demarcation that you're going to use this mud already on Erev Yom Tov. Because it will say, so remember again, mud is inherently muktzah, so the only way to be able to go ahead and use it to seal up your oven on Yom Tov would be as if you actively set it aside for use on Erev Yom Tov. Ravina says, the kitma shari. Using a mixture of ash to go ahead and seal up the oven is totally fine. There is no problem of lush, of kneading when it comes to ash. Why not? Rashi says over here, apparently ash doesn't really knead well. It doesn't really go ahead and mix with water to form a type of paste or to form a type of mixture. Therefore, it's not subject to the malacha of lush, and therefore it is not a problem to seal up your oven in this way. Beautiful. Says the Mishnah, or Gemara quotes Mishnah, you also can't put two barrels together. Remember again, in the Mishnah what we were talking about was as follows. Placing two barrels together and putting a pot on top of the two barrels. You have the fire in between the barrels. You're creating a makeshift stove. So the Mishnah said you can't do this. And again, we understood this to be a problem of binyan, a problem of building. So the Gemara says, Amrav Nachman, Avanim Shabli Saki Se Mutulat Sadidin Biyom Tov. So Rav Nachman says you are permitted to go ahead and stand up the stones of a makeshift Beis HaKisei, a makeshift toilet. Now, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. Avanim Shal Beis HaKisei, five lines are from the bottom. Avanim Shal Beis HaKisei, Avanim Gedolos Shemetzadidin Osan Lios Kimin Moshav Chalul. So I'll say literally, this is. You don't have to use much imagination. Two stones, you put them parallel to each other, they essentially form a seat, and this is where a person is able to relieve themselves. V'yoshvin aleim besados b'makom hamiyuchad lebeis hakisei. So again, in places where it was miyuchad, that you were going to, this was a place where people took care of their needs, they would set up these two parallel stones as a makeshift toilet. So the Gemara, I'm sorry? So the Gemara says, follows. So Rav Nachman says, Avanim shal beis hakisei, you're allowed to do this. You're allowed to create this. Say Rav Nachman, ein makit in shtei chavios, lisvos alena sakadera. So let's listen to this. So Rav Nachman says, you're allowed to set up this makeshift toilet. Right? Rabbah comes along and asks Rav Nachman, how are you allowed to do this? Is this not the same thing as the case in the Mishnah of the two barrels, putting the pot on top of the two barrels? And the Mishnah said it's problematic. Amarle Shaindy Avraham Mishum de Ka'avet Oala. No. The case ultimately again of the barrels with the pot, the problem with that is that you are actively creating an ohel. Right? You're actively creating a structure. Rashi says, Sheyesh lo gag. The pot itself serves as the roof for the ohel. Aval hocha leka gag. A person, this is the Gemara's first answer, a person doesn't have the status of a gag. So therefore, again, when the person sits down on the two stones, he's not a gag, and therefore there's not a problem of being an ohel. Amarle Rabba Zuta, Ravashi. If that's the case, so what the Gemara is now suggesting, what the Gemara is inferring is, the only time there's a problem of binyan is when there's the creation of a gag, a roof. If that's the case, if you build an itzteba, I will say itzteba in this context, Rashi says over here means kisei shel binyan levanim v'tit. This is a case of building a chair. But if you can imagine, it's a chair that's made of stones. But unlike a regular chair that would have you have four legs and you have a hollow interior, right? This chair is solid, right? So you just build a solid chair out of bricks. Well, it would sound like, according to what we just said, that shouldn't be a problem on Yom Tov. Why not? Because there's no gag. There's no roof, right? There's no cavity. There's no interior hollow space. There's no roof, so it shouldn't be a problem. No. Hasan binyan kabo asra Torah, binyan arai lo asra Torah. No, you have to understand something. Of course, that's problematic because that's a binyan, that's a structure. The Torah prohibited building a binyan kavua, binyan keva, an established structure, binyan arai lo asra Torah. But technically speaking, a temporary structure is not asr. The gazu rabbanon abinyan arai mishum binyan keva, and Chazal stepped in and said, you can't build a temporary structure lest you come to build a permanent structure. So if that's the case, then shouldn't the creation of the makeshift toilet actually be problematic? Should then not be considered at least maybe an ohel arai, in which case, again, halach l'maaseh should be asr, lest you come to build an ohel keva. V'hacha mishum kivodo lo gazru beirabanan. So we'll say this is one of these classic situations where, because of kavod abrios, because of human dignity, Chazal dispensed with their gezerah. So we'll say, so therefore, interestingly enough, the Gemara is giving really two different answers. The first approach of the Gemara was the creation of the makeshift toilet is not a problem of ohel altogether. Why isn't it a problem of ohel? Why not? Because a person is in a roof. The Gemara challenges that assertion. The Gemara says, even if you want to say that maybe the situation of the temporary toilet maybe is an ohel arai situation, ohel arai is gzera d'Rabbanan, and Chazal did not legislate in cases of kavod abrios. Incredible. So the Gemara goes right to Amar Rav Yehuda. So we'll say, now that we started this discussion, the Gemara gives other examples of this, of things that constitute, that look like an ohel arai, a temporary structure, and therefore the rabbis stepped in and legislated that one should not do this. Amar Rav Yehuda, Hai Midurta, this is fascinating. Building a bonfire. When you build a bonfire, on Yom Tiv, milamala lemata shari, milamata lemala aser. Really, you should build the bonfire from top down and not from bottom up. In other words, also what you should do is hold the top pieces in place and continue to fill in stuff under it. But don't build from the bottom up. Why not? Rashi says, milamala lemata lahaskel tchila min agag. Apparently, in the building of a bonfire, at least in the Gemara's bonfire, you essentially create something that looks roof-like. So the problem is, if you build from the bottom up, you end up creating a quasi-roofed structure, which at least will be a problem of binyan ohel midrabanan. But effectively, if you put the roof there first, and then build under the roof, quote unquote, and then build underneath the roof, that's not subject to the rabbinic prohibition of ohel arai. Pretty incredible. Top of Lamed Gimel, v'chein biyasa. So Rashi points out over here, you're cooking an egg, a large egg, on a tripod-like structure. So therefore, again, placing the egg there on top could constitute the creation of an ohel, of a structure, a roofed structure. See, both say, essentially what you see over here is Chazal said, we really don't want you building anything or creating anything that looks like a roofed structure on Yom Tiv. So the way to avoid that is essentially create the roof first, so hold the egg in place first, and then build everything underneath it. V'chein kedera, so to the case of the kedera, where you're putting, this is the case of the Mishnah, where you're putting a pot on top of two barrels. V'chein puria, the construction of a bed. V'chein chavisa, and stacking barrels as well, where sometimes you'll take two barrels and stack a third one on top, right? So halacha lamaisa, anything in which it appears that you're creating something roofed, don't build from the bottom up, but ultimately, again, build top down, roof down. But say, isn't it an incredible yesod? What a profound hashkafas hachaim also, that in life there are different ways of accomplishing your objectives, right? So sometimes in life you have to go ahead and build bottom up. Sometimes you have to build top down. Meaning what? That sometimes in life, the goal is just literally to put one foot in front of the other, right? Literally, again, one step after the other. Build up. I may not even know what I'm building up to. But as long as I know that every day has some level of incremental growth upward, that's an accomplishment. Other times in life, you're embarking upon something where you have to have the end in sight. You have to start with the roof. You have to start with the goal. I have to know exactly what it is that I'm working towards. And once I know that, I can build a support structure underneath it. They're both correct ways of building, right? They're both correct ways of self-actualizing. They're both correct ways of growing. And they're both necessary at different times in life. Sometimes one step after the other. I don't know exactly where I'm going. I just know that I'm trying to be better every single day. Other times, I know exactly what I want to do, exactly what I need to accomplish. I start with that, and then I build everything underneath it. You can't go ahead and support a pot with a piece of wood. Now, both say, we read this in the Mishnah yesterday, and it was not immediately clear exactly what this meant. We'll see in just a moment. V'chein b'deles, so too with a door. Now, both say, when you read that, what it sounds like is, you also can't support a pot with a door. Now, what does that mean? The Gemara says, "B'delas, you can't support a pot with a door." What does that mean? Ela ema v'chein hadelas. Rather, again, it means so too the delas. Now, we'll say, look at Rashi for just a moment. V'cheina ema v'cheina hadelas ein somchin also bebikas. The same way that you can't support a piece of wood with the pot. you can't support a pot with a piece of wood, so too you can't support a door with a piece of wood as well. We'll say what's happening over here. We are going to see that the Tana of our Mishnah subscribes to the approach that a kli cannot be moved for anything other than its primary designated usage. So when you look at wood on Yom Tiv, what do you see? What's the primary designated usage for wood on Yom Tiv? Fire. And therefore, again, the use of wood or the movement of wood for any other purpose, even of a constructive purpose, halacha l'maaseh cannot be done on Yom Tiv. That's the meaning over here. You can't move a piece of wood to support the pot. You can't move a piece of wood to support a door. I'm doing something meaningful and constructive. Tana of our Mishnah holds that wood can only be moved for its designated purpose, which is hasaka, which is kindling. Tana Rabban, and we're going to see this now. You can't support a piece of wood. The pot with a piece of wood. So too you can't support the door with a piece of wood. Why? Here we go. Because wood is only usable on Yom Tiv for kindling purposes. Rabbi Shimon will say, by the way, we're going to see, this is not to be necessarily immediately associated with the position of Rabbi Nechemiah, right? We saw Rabbi Nechemiah, right? Remember again, in Muktzah, we often focus on two shitas, right? Of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. In yesterday's daf, we were reminded of a third opinion, the opinion of Rabbi Nechemiah, who held that halacha l'maisa, a kli could only be moved for its designated purpose. I just want to point out that we are going to see that this concept, even if you're not Rabbi Nechemiah, the notion of wood only being moved for the purposes of hasaka, for the purposes of kindling, is an opinion that is held even outside of the orbit of Rabbi Nechemiah. So anyways, the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon matir. Rabbi Shimon says ultimately it's mutter, right? Because Rabbi Shimon will hold that halacha l'maisa again, as long as the wood is being used for a permissive purpose on Yom Tiv, then it is not muktzah. Furthermore, the Mishnah said that you cannot go ahead and lead an animal with a staff, with a stick on Yom Tiv. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon matir. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says it's mutter. Shleima Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon ka'avuha svira lei. So both say, so must be that Rabbi Elazar holds like his father Rabbi Shimon. Both say, remember again, what's Rabbi Shimon's shita? The way the Gemara always identifies it is Rabbi Shimon less le muktzah. Now, of course, it doesn't literally mean he doesn't hold the muktzah, but rather what it means is he has a more permissive view of muktzah. So Masir Belazar says that you can use a staff to go ahead and lead the animal, because halacha l'maisa, you're using the wood in a permitted fashion, to which the Gemara says, Lo, Baha afilu Rabbi Shimon modeh. It's not true. Interestingly enough, even Rabbi Shimon would agree that you cannot lead an animal with a staff on Yom Tiv. Why not? Mishum demechsi kiman da'azah lechinga. Because it looks like you are taking the animal to market, right? Ultimately, again, this is not really a muktzah issue. This is it becomes a muktzah issue, but it's a maris ayin issue. The problem with leading an animal with the staff is that's the way people would lead their animals to market. So to do that on Yom Tov looks like you are potentially engaging in commerce. Incredible. So as it says, the Gemara Chizra, what's the halacha with the Chizra? What's a Chizra? Look at Rashi. Chizra, Anaf 8, Shuchad Kikots. It is a branch of a tree that is sharp like a thorn. Berai letakol bitzli, kimin shiput v'litzlasbo. We'll say it's a wooden spit. A wooden spit. So what's the halach with Chizra? Rav Nachman Aser, Rav Sheishes Shari. Rav Nachman says a wooden spit is muktzah, and Rav Sheishes says it's mutter. Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rav Nachman Aser, B'yam tov mishum domuktzaninu, letaltal, shalo aso lekli mi be'od yom. So we'll say this is very important. We're dealing over here not with a piece of wood that was designated as a spit on Erev Yom Tiv. We're talking about over here a piece of sharpened wood that you found on Yom Tiv. And you look at it and you say, great, I could use this as a spit. So Rav Nachman will say, no, you can't. Because since it wasn't designated as a kli before Yom Tiv, therefore what? Halacha l'maisa, it's muktzah. Rav Sheishes will say that it is mutter. So the Gemara defines the parameters of the machlokas. B'retiva kol ya'amalo pligida aser. If it's moist, everyone agrees that it's aser. Why is that? Because we also listen to this. Rashi says, B'retiva, she'eno roi l'tautala afilo lahasaka d'kol ya'amalo pligida aser. Also listen to this. You see, here's what's fascinating. Everyone is going to agree. Well, I shouldn't say that. right now, everyone is going to agree. Sometimes if you could even get everybody to agree for just a moment, that's an accomplishment, right? So right now, everyone's going to agree with the following idea. That the license to move wood on Yom Tiv is predicated on the wood's usage as fuel, right? Fire, right? Once you have that, then maybe there's room to say that you could use it for something else. Moist wood in general is not considered to be usable for fire, for fuel. So therefore, the Gemara Sibirativa, if the wooden spit in question is moist, everyone agrees, lo pligi da aser. Everyone agrees it's aser because remember, the heter to move it requires it to potentially be usable as fuel. If it's not usable as fuel, it's muktzah. So ki pligi, where does the machlokes, Rav Nachman or Sheshes come up? Biyaveshta. If it's a dried piece of wood. Man da aser. So ultimately, the opinion of Nachman who says that it's aser, Amar lachalom nitnu eitzim ela lahasaka. Rav Nachman says the only license you have to move wood on Yom Tiv is when it's usable as fuel, right? So, and not only usable as fuel, but what? Used for fuel. That's the only heter to move wood on Yom Tiv is for fuel. Uman deshari amar lacha mali litzlos bo mali litzlos begachaloso. The opinion who says that you can move it, i.e. Rav Sheshes, will say, look. You're allowed to. Why are you allowed to move food? Why are you allowed to? You are allowed to use wood for fuel, right? So what does it? Which means you're allowed to use wood in the preparation of food. What does it matter if you're using the wood as the actual fire or you're using it as the spit to roast the animal? Either way, that's use of wood for food preparation. It's all called ochel nefesh. So we'll say that's the first version of the machlokes. So in this version, if the wood is moist, everyone agrees, aser. The machlokes is if the wood is dried and technically usable as firewood. Ikadami, an alternate version of this machlokes. Okay, so in this version, I will say everyone agrees that if the wood is dry, it's certainly mutter to use the spit. And the logic would be, because what does it matter if you use if you use wood as the actual coal, or if you use the wood as the spit? Either way, the wood is being used in food preparation. So keep pligi, where does the machlokes come up? Beritivasa. If the wood is moist. Man da aser de lo chazila saka. So the one who says that it's aser, i.e. Rav Nachman, will say, no, you have no heter to move this wood, because wood could only be moved when it's usable for the fire. This wood is not usable for fire, and therefore Allah lamaisa it's muktzah. Uman deshari amar lacha hachazila hasek gadol. But the opinion ultimately, again, who says that you can move it, will say, you know what? We've seen this before. We'll say that moist wood may not be usable for a small fire, but it's absolutely usable for what? A large fire. V'helchas son, what's the halacha? Yevesh deshari ritivasa aser. And the halacha says, the Gemara, is that the dried out piece of wood can be used as a spit, but the moist piece of wood cannot. So we'll say, so this is very interesting. So the Gemara developing the idea that even if you hold that wood cannot be moved for other than fuel purposes. We'll say, by the way, is the way we paskin, right? Is the way we paskin. Halacha l'maisa, wood on Yom Tiv could really only be moved, we'll call it for fuel purposes. We've expanded out the parameters of fuel purposes. Fuel purposes can mean actually to put in your oven to fuel the fire, or to be used as a spit. So you could go ahead and take a sharpened piece of wood on Yom Tiv and use it as a spit, but again, that license is only there if that spit is also usable as what? As fuel. And again, what kind of fire is fuel? What kind of fire? A small fire. Therefore, meaning what? That Allah Chalamais, it has to be dry. It has to be dry. Incredible. Darash Rava. So Rava darshan, Isha lo tikanes ledira eitzim, li tomehen ud. A woman should not enter into dira eitzim. Dira eitzim means the wood storage area. To go ahead, li tomehen ud. To go ahead and take a poker. Right? Literally a piece of wood to be used as a poker. So the Gemara says, V'ud. So what's going on over here? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, ud. Now, first of all, Rashi points out, Darash Rava, Dik Rabbi Yehuda Svirale. So remember again, the Gemara is pointing out, Rava holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda ultimately holds of a stricter view of muktzah, right? A more restrictive view of muktzah. So therefore, Rava says a woman cannot go into the dir eitzim, the wood storage house, to take out a piece of wood to be used as a poker. Why not? Rashi says, ud eitz lasos ud letanor v'taima mishum delo nitnu ela lahasik ela imkein naase kli Mibe'od yom. So this is very important. In Rabbi Yehuda's view, remember, can you go ahead and technically use a wood poker on Yom Tiv? You could, as long as what? It was made into a poker, or when I say made into, designated as a poker on Erev Yom Tiv. But halacha l'maisa, according to Rabbi Yehuda, to walk into the storage area, just pick up a piece of wood to use as a poker, that's going to be asra al tzilchos muktzah. V'ud shenishbar, and if you have a poker that broke on Yom Tiv, v'ud shenishbar, asr la'asiko b'Yom Tiv. You may not go ahead and use it as fuel for the fire on Yom Tiv. Why? Lefi shemasikin b'kelim, because halacha l'maisa you could fuel the fire with kelim. Ve'ein masikin b'shivrei kelim. But ultimately, again, you cannot fuel the fire with shivrei kelim. We've seen this concept before. Lememra, the Rabbi Yehuda Israeli. So we'll say now you're telling me that Rava holds like Rabbi Yehuda, the isle mukta. Because we'll remember again, what is Rava saying? Rava's saying that a woman can, and by the way, the usage of a woman over here is nondescript. In other words, it's just whatever the Metzias was, right? The idea over here is a person can't go in to the Dir Eitzim, to the storehouse, choose a piece of wood that's sitting there to use as a poker. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, unless you're only allowed to use wood according to Rava for fuel. You could use it as a kli, but ultimately again it have to have been designated as a kli prior to Yom Tiv. So the Gemara says lememra the Rabbi Yehuda Sverle the Islam mukta. You tell me now that Rava holds like Rabbi Yehuda, who holds of a more restrictive view of mukta. Va Amarle Rava l'shamei. But Rava said to his attendant, Tavi li bar avza. Vishadi maya l'shunra. But yet Rava said to his attendant on Yom Tiv, roast for me a duck, and go ahead, or a goose, and go ahead and throw its intestines to the cat. And I'm both saying, now the roasting of the duck is not a problem. What's interesting about this case over here is what? Is throwing the intestines to the cat. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi shadimei l'shunra hashleich b'nei me'ayim lechatul u'Rabbi Yehuda asr l'taltalo u'lesito lechatul d'me esmo mucham la'adam haya v'lo leklavim. See, I both say in Rabbi Yehuda's worldview, in his muktzah view, you should not be able to go ahead and throw the intestines to the cat. Why not? Because lamaisa, according to Rabbi Yehuda, those intestines were fit for human consumption Erev Shabbos, Erev Yom Tiv. And therefore, halacha lamaisa, they were not prepared for animal usage on Yom Tiv, in which case they should be muktzah. But yet here you have Rava instructing his attendant to throw the intestines to the cat on Yom Tiv, which sounds like he does not hold like Rabbi Yehuda, to which the Gemara says, no. The Gemara says, Hassam, it's different. Kevan de Masrichi. We'll say everyone knows that goose intestines go bad quickly, right? And therefore what? Me'esmo daite iluye. From yesterday, already from Erev Yom Tiv, his intentions was to go ahead and give the intestines to the cat. So halacha l'maisa, again, even Rabbi Yehuda would be okay with this particular case. So I'll say, so once again, first of all, so I'll just point out, halacha l'maisa, the Shulchan Aruch does adopt a more restrictive view when it comes to wood. Right? That wood is really only used for hasaka. That wood could only be moved for kindling purposes. But we expand the scope of kindling to either mean fuel for the fire or, for example, use of the spit. But if you want to go ahead and handle wood and use it as a spit, that only works if the wood is also usable as what? Fuel for the fire, and not a large fire, but a small fire, which means that halacha l'maisa, the wood has to be dried out. Incredible. Good. We'll say Mishnah. Great sugya. Great sugya. Says the Mishnah, Rabbi Lezer Omer, no to adam kisei mishalafon of lachtzos boshinov. Rabbi Eliezer says a person could take we'll say kisem. Kisem is a splinter of wood. A splinter of wood. A person could take a little wood splinter from in front of him to use as a toothpick. So I want to pick up a splinter of wood to use as a toothpick. Now Rashi points out over here, what does this mean? Mishalafanov, in front of him. What does that refer to? Rashi says, Nota Adam Kisa Mishalafanov, Mimashalafanov Babayis. This is talking about you find a splinter of wood in your house, right, on the floor. You find a little piece of wood, right, you can pick it up and use it as a toothpick. Okay. And furthermore, you can gather whatever wood is in your chatzar, and you could kindle a fire with it. Shekol ma shebechatzer muchanhu. Because Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, whatever is in your chatzar is considered to be muchan. And well, remember we spoke about this before. Contrast that with, let's say, wood that's scattered in the sadeh, right? Wood in the field is only muchan if what? If you designate it prior to Yom Tiv. But Rabbi Elazar is saying is that halacha l'maisa, anything in your chatzar, and by the way, whenever we speak about a chatzar, we also presuppose that what? What's the nature of that chatzar? It's enclosed. Right? So anything in your chatzar ultimately is muchan. Good. The chacham say. First, I'll take a look at. I will say the chacham say megavev mishalafanav. The chacham say you can go ahead and gather from that which is in front of you, umadlik, and you can go ahead and kindle it. So, we'll say if you look at Rashi over here, Rashi says something fascinating. The chacham are arguing on Rabbi Elazar on 2 points. Says Rashi, "V'chamim omer megavev mishalafanav madlik, aval min hachatzer lo." Hoyel v'dakinheim v'tarach l'kosheshan v'kosheshan me'esmol lav lahachi kaimi. Suppose say first of all they argue and the Chum say you cannot gather small pieces of wood from your chatzar because that is a tircha yisera. It's too much effort expended on Yom Tiv. V'dika'amret not al kisim lachtzos shinav me'esmol anan islan da'af mishalafanav lo yital el lahadlik. Don't suppose say listen to this. The Chum are arguing Rabbi Elazar on 2 points. Number one, they say you can't pick up toothpicks, right? They can't pick up pieces of wood to use as toothpicks. Why not? Because the Chachamim subscribe to the idea that the only license to move wood on Yom Tiv is for fuel, for fire. So first of all, they dispute the whole toothpick thing, right? So that's machlokas number one. Rabbi Eliezer says you can pick up wood for a toothpick, the wood that's in front of you in your house. Chum say you can't move wood except for fuel. Number two, they hold that halacha l'maisa, in terms of gathering wood for a fire, you can gather wood that is mishalafanav in front of you in your home, but you cannot gather wood from your chatzar. Why not? They will hold too much tircha involved, too much effort. Next, both say this is a great sugya. Ein motzien es ha'or. You cannot create fire on Yom Tiv. You cannot create. I both say the novelty in this ruling is almost all ochal nefesh is predicated on the use of fire, right? And you would think that if ochal nefesh is mutter, the creation of fire is mutter as well. Kamash malon, it is not. Now, why you're not allowed to create fire? We're going to see is going to be a raging machlokes rishonim. So watch this. In motzien asar, you cannot create fire. Lo mina eitzim, not from wood. Lo mina avanim, not from stones. Lo mina afar, not from dirt. V'lo mina rafim, not from tiles, heated tiles. V'lo mina mayim. Right, if you were to condense water, right, in a utensil and shine the light through the water, creating heat. Nor can you heat up tiles in order to go ahead and roast on them. Let's take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Mishum demolid. Rashi says the problem of creating fire on Yom Tiv is molid, is nolad. Right? It's true. Interesting. If we saw that we saw this in Smichas Chaver, that there is an interesting distinction between molid and nolad. Right? The distinction is, I see Adam's already shaking his head. Right? What's the distinction? Right? Distinction. Good. I only put you on the spot, guys, and you could answer it. And I want to give your uncle nachas. Hey, so ultimately, again, I will say molid means something you create biyadayim, you actively create. Nolad is something which is created de facto. Beitzah shenolda biyamtiv, right? Something created. So we don't have to necessarily be some Daik and Rashi over here, but what Rashi is saying is the problem of creating fire on Yom Tiv is a problem of molid. We're going to see this sugya, but I'll just mention to you the other school of thought, the other Rishon, not Rashi. What's the problem of creating fire on Yom Tiv? They hold that fire is machshirei ochel nefesh. What's the halacha about machshirei ochel nefesh? What's the halacha? We saw it last week. What's the halacha? Any machshirei ochel nefesh, which could be done on Erev Yom Tiv with the same results, cannot be done on Yom Tiv. Well, you can light a fire on Erev Yom Tiv with the same exact results. Therefore, there is no heteron for fire to kindle an original fire. We're talking about, remember, creation of an original fire, not to light one fire from another fire. The creation of an original fire is machshirei ochel nefesh, and ultimately, again, it can be done before Yom Tiv with the same results. Therefore, it cannot be done on Yom Tov itself. So we'll say a fundamental machlokes. And by the way, there's a huge nafkamina, right? What's the huge nafkamina between those two approaches? Huge nafkamina, which is, right? Your fire goes out on Yom Tov. You lit a fire prior to Yom Tov. Your fire goes out on Yom Tov. Are you permitted to go ahead and relight it? So what's the answer? Depends. According to Rashi, can you relight it? No. It's still it's sort of molid. But if you hold it's machshiri ochel nefesh, and halacha l'maisa, you did it. You did your part before Yom Tov. But now something happened that went out. You should be permitted to go ahead and relight it. Well, we'll see this sugya. But again, we're going to go with Rashi for now, that the issue of creating fire on Yom Tov is an issue of nolad, and therefore halacha l'maisa, you can't create fire on Yom Tov. Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, I'll say, Amud Beis, ochle behema, ein bahem mishum tikun kli. So it's a very interesting sugya. Literally, it means ochle behema, which Rashi says means over here kigon kash va'ale kanim. For example, straw, right? Straw or pieces of reed. Ein bahem mishum tikun kli umukter liktom uletakin kash shibalim b'shabes lachto shinab. I will say, since we started with the topic of toothpicks, so the Gemara is continuing this topic, and what Rabbi Yehuda is saying is as follows: if you take soft animal food and you fashion that into a toothpick, that is not a problem of tikkun kli on Yom Tiv. Now I will say, now, or Shabbos for that matter. Now, interestingly enough, the idea over here is because the example Rashi gives is like straw or reeds. Because the item is soft, fashioning it into a toothpick is not considered to be creation of a kli. But say, by the way, there's a lot of profundity in that line also. Ochle behema. Right? People who eat like behemoths. Ein bahem mishum tikun kli. There's no way to really rectify your personalistic kli if you eat like a behemoth. I will say, what does that mean to eat like a behemoth? It's not just about how a person eats. If a person takes an approach to gashmius like a behemoth, right? How does a behemoth relate to gashmius? How does a behemoth relate to materialism? It's just an indiscriminate usage, right? Whatever's around, I'll just utilize for my own pleasure. That's how a behemoth uses gashmius. There's no thought by a behemoth about how to be ma'ale gashmius, how to take something purely material and somehow use it for the pursuit of the spiritual. It's just usage. It's just consumption. That's called ochle behema. That's called consumption of a behema. Just the use of more and more gashmius with no thought about how to infuse holiness into that gashmius. That's called ochle behema. If a person takes that approach to gashmius, ein bahem mishum tikun kli. Remember again, we say this on Yamim Noraim. Harei ani lefanecha kichli malibusho klima. Right? A person is a kli. A person is a receptacle. So what's my avoda in life? I am this strange synthesis, this strange synergistic partnership between Adama and between Shamayim, right? Like Rashi says, on the sixth day, Kadosh Baruch Hu, in order to keep Shalom between Shamayim and Aretz, had to create a being which was representative of both. So Adam, right? Adam is from Adama and Adameh Lekel Elyon. I'm from the earth, I'm from Kadosh Baruch Hu. And what determines the essence of my identity? How I use Gashmius in life. If I could find a way to take my material side and infuse holiness, infuse spirituality into it, then I am a successful person. That's our avoda, to be ma'ala the nitzotzos, to be ma'ala the gashmi, to take every. That's why Judaism, we've mentioned this many times, Judaism is not an ascetic religion. Judaism says, enjoy gashmios, but just make sure you pull out some ruchnios from the gashmios. If you don't, you're ochle behema. That's animalistic consumption, just to enjoy materialism with absolutely no pursuit of the spiritual. And if a person does that, ein ba mishum tikun kli, then I'm not rectifying my personalistic kli. I'm not fulfilling my tachlis as a human being. Such an incredible line. Eisvei, Eisir of Kahana, and it's Pasha Pshat in the Gemara. Eisir of Kahana of Yehuda. So we'll say, so therefore again, what you have over here is you have Rabbi Yehuda saying, right, Mishnah established a machlokes about picking up a piece of wood for a toothpick. Okay? So remember again, and remember, that machlokes is not as much focused on toothpicks, right? What is that machlokes focused on? What is it focused on? Movement of wood on Yom Tov. That's really what it's focused on, right? So you have Rabbi Eliezer who says that halacha l'maisa you could move a piece of wood, but ultimately again you have Chachamim saying wood can only be moved l'tzorech fire. Now Rabbi Yehuda is transitioning, and Rabbi Yehuda is saying that halacha l'maisa, if you have a piece of animal food that is soft, there's no problem with fashioning that into a kli because it's not called a kli. Says the Gemara, Eisi Rav Kana Rabbi Yehuda. Shav is going to be a great sugi by the way. Rav Kana said to Rabbi Yehuda, "Mitaltlin atzei b'samim lahariach bahem." You're permitted to go ahead and take atzei b'samim, which literally means pieces of fragrant wood or pieces of very fragrant branches. Atzei b'samim, right? Or fragrant herbs. You're allowed to carry them on Yom Tov lahariach bahem, to go, or Shabbos that matter, to smell them. Ula hanif b'hem lachola, or to wave them, right, to create like a fragrant breeze for a chola. Umolelo, you can roll it. Umariach bo, and you could go ahead and smell it. Both say, now, why are you rolling it? To release the fragrance. So you could roll it and you could smell it. However, below yiktemenu lahariach bo. What can't you do? You shouldn't snip it, right? You shouldn't cut it in order to go ahead and release some of the fragrance. Now what's wrong with that? Look at Rashi. Third line down from the top of Rashi. Lo yiktemenu lahariach bo, shemakom haketima lach v'reichon nodef gezira delo lesi lekotmo lachzos boshinov. Oh. Now let's say, why don't we want you to go ahead and cut the fragrant item? Because we're concerned that you may come to cut it and make a toothpick out of it. And remember, the creation of a toothpick is a problem of what? Of what? Tikun kli, of the creation of a utensil. So Rashi says over gezerah, delo lesi lekotmo lachzos boshinov dehasam kli mashvilei v'ika isur d'oraisa. That's very strong wording. Right, so therefore, both say, listen to this. So therefore, if you have a piece of fragrant item, atzei b'samim, a fragrant branch, say you could roll it, you could smell it. This doesn't sound right? But you could roll it, you could smell it. But what you can't do is you can't. Good, but you can't snip it. You can't snip it. Why not? Because the act, even though, why are you cutting it? Why are you cutting it? In order to release some of the aroma, because the act of cutting it looks like you may be getting close to creating a toothpick, and that could be tikun kli midaraisa. So the Gemara says, "Vim katmo patra avalasar." But if you did cut it, if you did snip it, it's patra avalasar. We'll say, what does patra avalasar mean? It's asr midirabanan. The Gemara says, "Lachzos boshinav lo yiktemenu." If you want to make from it a toothpick, you should not do this. Vim katmo, and if you did so, chayiv chatos. Wow. So we'll say, if you went ahead and you mamish made it into a toothpick, chayiv chatos, which means what? It's an iser daraisa. Iser daraisa. What's wrong with making a toothpick? Ultimately, again, tikun kli. You're creating a utensil. Amrle hashta pata aval asar kakashili. So we'll say, remember again, this is Rav Kana asking Rav Yehuda. So Rav Yehuda says back to Rav Kana, listen, the truth is, this Bryce was already problematic for me when you spoke about the case of Patra Aval Aser, Chayiv Chatas Mi Boile. Of course, again, Chayiv, once you're going to tell me it's Issa D'Oraisa, surely it's problematic. Because also remember again, what was Rabbi Yehuda saying? Rabbi Yehuda was saying is that there's no problem with taking a soft item and fashioning a toothpick out of it. He was using an example of animal food. You could take a soft item, fashion a toothpick. Rav Kahana quotes this Beitzah, and the Beitzah seems to indicate that it is a problem fashioning a toothpick. It might even be an Isser D'Oraisa. To which the Gemara says, but it's not a contradiction, I'll tell you why. Kitanya hi bekashin. That Beitzah will say that says that you can't take atzei b'samim and make it into a toothpick. What is it talking about? A hard item. A hard item. Okay, so now this makes a lot of sense. To take a hard item and fashion it into a toothpick, I understand why that's tikun kli. To which the Gemara says, really? The Bryce is talking about a hard item? Kashin b'nei malilaninu. Both say, remember again, in the Bryce that Rav Kana quoted, what are you allowed to do? You're allowed to roll it to release the fragrance. If something is hard, can you roll it to release the fragrance? That doesn't make sense. To which the Gemara says, rather, there is a piece of information, and here's how you have to read it. Mololo umariach bo, so you can roll it, right? If you have mololo umariach bo, you can roll the atzei b'samim in order to smell it. Kotmo umariach bo, you could even snip it in order to smell it. But when is that so? Birakim, when you have soft items, right? Soft atzei b'samim. Because we'll say soft fragrant items. Because if it's soft, we're even going to allow you to snip it. And we're not afraid that if you go out and you snip it, you're going to make it into a toothpick. Why? Why? Because even if you made it into a toothpick, it's not a problem. Why? It's soft. About bekoshin, but if we're talking about a harder item, lo yiktemenu, you should not snip it. Vim kotmo, because we'll say again, why shouldn't you snip it? Because we're afraid that's what? That's what? You're going to make it into a toothpick. And making it into a toothpick is problematic. Why? Tikun kli. Vim kotmo, and if you did go ahead and snip it, patra aval aser. It's aser, right? It's an aser midrabanan. Lachtzos poshinov. But if you want to take this item and make it into a toothpick, lo yiktemenu, you should not snip it. Vim kotmo chayiv chatos. And if you did make it into a toothpick, and we're talking about over here a harder item, then halacha l'maisi b'chayv chatos, that being isur d'oraisa. So Tani, so we'll say, so what the Gemara is saying is like this. The issue still, Rabbi Yehuda's original ruling that taking something soft and making it into a toothpick is absolutely fine. That's not called tikkun kli. The Beitzah now that says, now we're being introduced to fragrant items. So the Beitzah teaches me I can roll fragrant items. What I just can't do is I can't go ahead and snip it. Because the act of snipping it, the concern is that you may come to fashion it into a toothpick, which again, if the item is soft, will only be an Isra D'Rabbanan. But if the item is hard, ultimately again could be an Isra D'Oraisa. So Tani Chada, one Beitzah says, Kot mo umariach bo, you could snip it and smell it, V'tanya idach lo yiktem el ariach bo, and the other Beitzah says you should not snip it to smell it, and it's not a contradiction. Amrav Yizera, Amrav Chisda, lo kasha, habarakin, habakashin. I'm going to both say a very simple distinction. If it's soft, you could snip it and smell it. If it's hard, you can't snip it and smell it. Maskev, Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Bekashin amaylo. But let's analyze this. So now, if you have a thicker or a stronger atzei bisamim, we're now saying that you're not allowed to snip it and smell it. Why not? Amaylo. Maishnami hadistan. I will say, why is this different than the following case? Shover adam es hachavis lechomi menu grogros. You're allowed to go ahead and smash open a barrel in order to eat grogros, in order to eat dried figs from it. Ubilvad shalo yiskavein lasos kli. We just had this in Smichas Chaver. As long as what? You don't have the intention to make a kli. So as we'll say, you could lop off the top of the barrel as long as your intention is not to make a brand new kli. Va'od, ha Rava baravad of Ravavin barada, damri tarbayu, ki avinan be Rav Yehuda, when we were in the home of Rav Yehuda, hava mifshach, v'yohiv lan alusa. Listen to this. What did Rav Yehuda do? He would strip off the branches off a large piece of wood. Alusa afagav dechazya lekasisa denagri v'chatzini. And ultimately, I'm going to say, so what he would do is, he would strip off, first of all, look at Rashi just a moment. Vatanan shover adam chabis, migufa shishba grogros, ba'ochel b'vatshla yiskavin liyafos hashvira, lios alepeh shetehei od kli. So I will say, if you have a closed barrel, you could lop off the top of the barrel, right, to get out the figs, as long as your intention is not to make a nice, specific, or a refined opening. Right, as long as your intention is right, asiyas pasach. Right, as long as your kavanah is not to make a refined opening, you're good to go. So I'll say, so that's number one. Furthermore, Rava Baravada said that when we were in the home of Rav Yehuda used to do something very interesting. He would take branches and he would strip off the I'll call it the smaller branches, right? So I'll say, if you can imagine, you have a large branch from a tree that fell off. The large branch has smaller branches. He would strip off the smaller branches from the larger branches, and ultimately, again, we would use those pieces of wood. Even though now, those very pieces of wood became usable for what? As axe handles. As axe handles. To which the Gemara says, Lo kasha. Shabbos say, the point over here the Gemara is making is, you see that halacha l'maisa, we allow you to do certain things, and we're not concerned that the items are going to be misused in a way that could result in malacha. So we allow you to open up a barrel as long as you don't make a more refined opening for the barrel. We allow you to strip off the smaller branches off the larger branches, and we're not concerned that what? That you're going to make an axe handle. Similarly, you should be allowed to what? You should be allowed to what? to go ahead and if you have a hard piece of aromatic wood, right, and you want to snip it in order to smell it, that should be permitted. And we shouldn't be concerned that what? That you're going to make a what? A toothpick. That's the kasha. To which the Gemara says, kasha, har Rabbi Elazar, har Rabbanan. It's two different opinions. This Sanya, Rabbi Elazar Omer, no to Adam Kisim Mishal Afar Lachtos Boshinav. Because Rabbi Elazar is the one in the Mishnah who says that you could take a piece of wood that you find in front of you in your house and you can use it as a toothpick. The Chachamim Omrim Lo Yital Ela Me'avos Shal Behema. The Chachamim say you're not allowed to pick up a piece of wood in your house to use as a toothpick. The most you could do is if in the animal trough, which is in the animal feed, there are some pieces of wood, you could go ahead and pick that up and use it as a toothpick. The shavin shelo yiktemenu. But everyone agrees that Allah Lamaisa, if you have a piece of aromatic wood, you shouldn't snip it. But if you did snip a piece of wood in order to go ahead and what? To use as a toothpick or to pick a lock, so in other words, you fashioned it into a kli, b'shogeg b'shabes chayiv chatos. If you did this b'shogeg, if it's Shabbos, you're chayiv chatos. B'mezid, I will say now, it doesn't say the case of mezid on Shabbos, because mezid of Shabbos is a chiyav misa. B'mezid b'yamtiv sofeges ha'arbam divrei Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar would say, halacha l'maisi, if you did it b'mezid on yamtiv, you get malchus. The chum say, echad zeh v'echad zeh, eino ela mishum shabos. Both cases ultimately, again, will only be an Isser D'Rabbanan. Rabbi Elazar de Ka'amar Hasam Chayiv Chatos Hacha Patra Avalasar. Rabbi Elazar, who will say that in the Brisa where you made it into a Kli or Chayiv Chatos, would say by the case of where you snip it for fragrance, ultimately again Patra Avalasar. Rabbanan de Ka'amri Hasam Patra Avalasar. The Rabbanan will say that by the case of the utensil, it's Patra Avalasar Hacha Mutter Lechatchila. Here it will be mutter lechatchila, but let's say the Rabbi Eliezer. But let's say Rabbi Eliezer hadisnan shover adam es achavas lechom and a grogros ubevachleis kavin lasos kli. But doesn't Rabbi Eliezer hold the halacha lemaisa? What about the case where you're allowed to open up the barrel, lap open the barrel, right? As long as your intention is not to make a kli. So again, shouldn't that permit the snipping of fragrant wood to release the aroma, as long as your intention is not to make a kli? But say, here we go. Amar Ravashi kitanya hi b'mustaki. Wow. I'll say, what's the case here? The case over here is a mustaki. So I'll say, what's a mustaki? Rashi says over here, mustaki, chavis shavura, shemedabkin shavareha b'svaf shalitz. But I'll say, this is a unique barrel that is made by gluing together broken pieces of other barrels. And therefore, so I'll say the idea over here is this type of barrel, because it is made by putting together other broken pieces of barrel, does not have the real status of a kli. Right? Mustaki doesn't have the real status of a kli. Because mustaki doesn't have the real status of a kli, lopping open the top of it is not really halachically problematic. Shabbos says, so just how do we paskin in this case? So this is the end of the sugya. So how do we paskin? In other words, it's an interesting. So on a very simple level, this whole discussion started how? Because Rabbi Yehuda made a statement. What was Rabbi Yehuda's statement? That you could fashion a toothpick out of what? Out of Michael Behema. Right? That if you have food, soft food, that ultimately is consumed by an animal, and you want to fashion a toothpick out of a piece of straw, out of a piece of reed, you're allowed to do that because that's not called tikkun kli if it's coming from something soft. What that then did is opened up the entire discussion by aromatic items as well. What can you roll? What can you sniff? What can you snip? Right? Again, doesn't sound right, but you understand. Right? What can you roll? What can you sniff? And what can you snip? The Gemara wanted to make a distinction ultimately maybe between soft items and hard items. Soft items can be snipped because there's no fear you're going to make it into a kli. Hard items cannot be snipped because there's a concern you're going to make it into a kli. That then got into a more general discussion about how far do we have to be concerned that you may come to do something as a result of an action you engaged in now. That got into the lopping off the top of the barrel. That got off to Rabbi Yehuda's house, that they would strip the smaller branches from the larger branch, and it wasn't a concern you're going to make it into an axe handle. So let's listen to this. So the halacha, this appears in Hilchos Shabbos. Simin Shin Chav Beis Sifdal. Listen to this. Shlomo writes, Achlei behema ein bahem mishum tikun kli. We pass like Rabbi Yehuda. Namely, there is no problem of fashioning a toothpick on Yom Tiv, on Shabbos or on Yom Tiv, from Meichel Behema. Lefichach mutter liktom afilu besakin kash o teven velachtzos bo shinov. Say Rabbi said you could take a piece of straw, right? Or a piece of straw, and you can go ahead, or anything soft that is consumed by animals, and you can make it into a toothpick on Shabbos or Yom Tiv, and that is not called Tikkun Kli. In Shulchan Aruch says you can even use a knife. The Mishnah Berurah comments on this, and he says, davar sharoi lachil lebehema umasha b'gemar dafilu in omin b'shvilam kigon itzim rakim sharoi lam lachila kan lo miskar. Good. So let's listen to this. However, the Gemara says aval kisam she'eino ochal behema. But if you have a twig, right? Literally, kisam is a piece of wood. Animals don't eat wood. Ultimately, again, afilu litlo kedei lachtzos boshinov aser. We also say you can't even pick it up to use it as a toothpick. So again, ultimately, we pass like Rabbi Yehuda, but you'll also begin to see, although we'll see this in tomorrow's daf, we really pass like the Chum in the Mishnah as well. You can't pick up wood to use it as a toothpick on Shabbos or on Yom Tiv. And most what you could do is you could take something soft, use it as a toothpick. You could even take something soft and fashion it into a toothpick, because that is not called tikkun kli. Something hard which is not consumed by a behema cannot be taken as a toothpick, cannot be refined into a toothpick. And again, the Mishnah Berurah says, because he's wrote afilu netila stam belikatima aser mishum muktzah kishar eitzim. Because also this goes back to what we just learned. We learned before that the only license to move wood on Yom Tov is for what purpose? For what purpose? Fuel. Now we could have an expansive definition of fuel, right? We could say that fuel also includes use as a spit, but one thing it doesn't include, which is use as a toothpick, right? So therefore, halacha l'maisa, you could take something soft, use it as a toothpick, Michael Behema, something soft, use it as a toothpick, fashion into a toothpick, but something hard, ultimately, again, cannot be used as a toothpick, cannot be fashioned as a toothpick. We'll stop over, pick up the rest of the Gemara tomorrow. Shkoyach.